so tiering the cavalry commanders in Siege of Winterfell. I think there's quite a clear hierarchy of these, at least of the paid commanders. When you get to the free-to-play ones, it's a bit more debatable. They're a lot closer in value, I'd say. And it's probably going to be very subjective, and you may well disagree with me there. But here are the commanders we have for them. So there's Meryl, Rob, Enzo, Lena, Jean, Russell, Kevin, Mengo, and Layla. I think there's a clear standout at the top of all these. He was added last season, and it's Enzo. He is obviously a 40% all stats commander naturally, which means he's a 200% all stats commander in Siege of Winterfell. So 200% health, 200% attack, and 200% defense. So his buffs are vastly superior to any of the other options, which immediately gives him a leg up. He's awakenable, so that will immediately, even if you don't put tokens into him, give you 4k extra army size. This is assuming he's gold, obviously. If you don't have him gold, this will go for all of them. They will obviously drop down in the tiers. His rage cost is 800, which is on the higher side, but it's not 1000, so you will be able to rotate through your actives a little bit quicker than with something like Layla or Kevin that we'll get into. And then his active just generally is very overstated, so it's 960%, and then it will do an extra 750. So in terms of single target damage, that's a guaranteed 1710% attack damage, and it can hit 3 targets max on that line, so it can ramp up to 3210 attack damage total every time it casts, which is an insane amount. Anything over 3000 is reaching crazy levels and just vastly superior to anything else single target based, at least. It has the extra effect of reducing infantry defense and health as well for 7 seconds, which is kind of a hefty debuff, honestly. That lasts a long time, so you're going to want to focus him on infantry marches if possible. But just in terms of his overstatedness of both his base stats and his active, he definitely goes at the top. I'm just going to do either end of his tier list just for the reference points. So Mengo, I think, is by far the worst. If we go find him, he's here. So he has 800 rage cost and is active, and we've just seen how ridiculous Enzo's is. Mengo's is a 2-hitting single target, which does 270 each hit, so 540 in total, which is around 6 times less damage than Enzo's active can get, whilst being the same rage cost. Obviously he's free to play, so you'd expect it to be worse, but it is very, very bad. If your free to play commanders have the high rage costs on that active, they really need to be good, because there's a lot of very good low rage cost actives that are solid value, like CO of Russell. His is half the rage cost, but it does more damage and has a lower cooldown, and he still has the attack stats, because that's Mengo's main appeal here. But it just doesn't compensate. He does have the dispel effect, but I don't think it makes up for how poor he is generally elsewhere, honestly. In terms of the other top tiered commanders, I think Lena is probably a clear second. She's like Enzo in that her buffs are just a tier above anything else left in this list. Maybe Layla is debatable. But the thing with Lena, which really puts her ahead, is the rage cost. It will help you filter through your actives a lot quicker. So, spoiler alert, the other 2 top tier ones will be Kevin and Layla for Cav, and they both have 1000 rage cost. So you'll effectively be able to cast this twice in the time you'll be able to use them. And whilst it doesn't do damage, it is quite a solid effect. So 45% attack damage. I'm assuming that is a direct buff to attack damage, as the tooltip states, because it would just say attack if it was increasing the attack stat directly, which makes that a lot better than you could potentially interpret it as. And then the tranquility effect, which removes and gives you immunity to debuffs. And like I said, of the rage cost, you'll be casting this over and over again, so you'll really be keeping this march clean of stuff that will make it struggle a bit more in combat. It's also awakenable as well, so again you get that bonus army size which is something Kevin, for example, won't have pretty much some of her direct competition. If she didn't have the top tier base buffs, maybe she'd drop down a bit, but I definitely think because of the low rage cost, she's probably the second best. And then next to her there's Layla and Kevin, and these two are very, very close in value, and I'm honestly not sure which is better. It's probably very situational, depending on which is better. So Layla obviously has the better buffs. She'll, if you're running a full cav march at least, effectively have 75% more health and 150% more defense. So I think it looks worse than it actually is, because their attack stats are the same. It's still 75% total attack for both. So it's just a bit of the cav health which you're gaining. And then cav defense, especially in like a Siege of Winterfell context, I'm not sure how much that will actually do for you anyway. But they both have very similar effects. So it's an 1000 rage cost ability. And they do the same thing. So it's a 3-second wind up time where it casts a big red circle. And then it will cast an AoE effect which pulses for 4 seconds. And they have slightly different values in this. Layla will do 240%, which is a max of about 960% single target damage, but you'll really get the maximum value of it if you're hitting the max of 5 targets, and if you hit all of them it will do 4,800% attack coefficient off your troop attack, and Kevin will do 6,000% of your troop attack if you maximize the value of that active ability. That is slightly unrealistic because people can just walk out of it at any time. So getting the full value of it is quite difficult, but if you have a bunch of people casting these in your alliance, so you're fighting over the package, it's kind of impossible to totally avoid these zones. So they are still very high value, and then they have different debuffs attached to them. So Kevin here has the better debuff actually. It will inflict a dispel every second. So this will cast like 4 times. Remember, every 1 second you're in that 4-second circle. 50% chance to trigger dispel, which will cause immunity and removing all buffs. So say they get buffed by their Lena with the 45% attack buff, this would remove it. In effect, it actually potentially wouldn't because of the tranquility effect, granting immunity to it. But there are other buffs which don't grant immunity, and you'll get rid of them. And you can potentially get rid of this too, because it's only a 75% chance to proc also. So that dispel is very, very good. Also cause enfeebled, which reduces their attack damage dealt by 35%. Layla's is a little bit worse, it just causes cowardice, which reduces the counter attack damage by 50%. So Kevin is definitely better in terms of that active ability. That is undeniable. It does more damage, it has better effects attached to it. But Layla has the extra army size from Awakening, so here I have 4 stars. So I get 10,000 extra troops from her, which makes a big deal because army size increases don't work here, so 10,000 goes quite a long way honestly. Plus she has the extra 75% health and extra 150% cav defense. So I'm gonna say these two are personal preference and maybe situational on which is better. I think personally I'm going to run Layla with Lena and Enzo as my main march. But Kevin, especially if you don't have any of these free gold, substituting him in is more than fine. He's very, very high value. His active is insanely, insanely good. And then you get to these 4, which is like I said earlier about how they're just a bit hard to quantify, because they're all very similar in value honestly. I'm going to put Russell here in B tier. The reason for this is he has the attack, which is the highest value stat, especially on Cav, that's what you want. But the thing with Russell is just the rage cost. You'll be able to cycle through your actives a lot faster with this, especially if you have maybe 1 or 2 premium commanders of this list. Like if you can get out your Layla or your Enzo actives more often, that is a huge deal because they are vastly superior to any of the free-to-play actives whatsoever. But I think even in free-to-play marches, I'd put Russell here. So it's 600% troop attack. I've shown how that's better than Mango's already, despite the rage cost. Then it also reduces rage by 200, which is pretty significant, and reduces their total attack, defense, and health by 100% for just 4 seconds. But I do think Russell is very good value. It's all the rage cost, so he's not as sexy on his face value, but the rage cost really does boost him up a bit. Then these three, these are all very subjective in my opinion. I've always been very, very high on Jean, but I think if I'm being totally subjective about it, she probably has to go in C tier. Just because of the buffs. So the thing with Jean is her skill is really, really good. So it's relatively low rage cost of 600 and only a 9-second cooldown. It does 540% of your troops' attack as damage. The issue with that is she doesn't have attack of her own, so she can't really buff that, especially if it's not your Lord March. Like, you can be doing percentages of your attack, but if you're not buffing that attack higher and higher, it's a bit pointless. But the thing that makes her strong, and I think worthy of going into lineups, especially for free-to-play players, this Fear of War effect, I really wish it was 100%, so it's only a 75% chance, and it's only single target. If it was AoE, she'd be crazy, but it basically makes the target unable to use normal attacks or counter, which is a huge swing in damage. So say you hit that on a Meryl March, and the marches were the exact same, but they had Meryl and you had Jean, and there was Russell and Robin instead. Jean should in theory outtrade the Meryl March because of that Fear of War effect, unless it gets dispelled, because they won't be able to use normal attacks. So you'll only be getting damage from that skill, which whilst hard to quantify, is very, very strong. It also buffs cav defense and health by 150% for 7 seconds, which is quite a long effect, and the health especially helps bridge that gap in stats. But I do think it's maybe a bit too much of a stretch to put it in too high a tier. If it was 100% chance of proccing, if she had maybe just a bit of attack, if it was AoE, then 100% she'd go up. I would still run her too in free-to-play compositions, because I do think it's that good, but you will be neglecting your stats a bit choosing her over one of these two. So I'm going to put both of these down into C tier as well, which gives quite an interesting curve here. It's like a magnet shape. I'm not sure that's what tier lists are necessarily meant to look like, but if we go and look at them, so Meryl is 650 rage cost, and he's just straight up stats or just like raw brute force. There's nothing fancy to Meryl at all. It's 960% troop attack. It's only single target though, and it will then buff your cav attack by an extra 150%, but it's only 4 seconds, so that will be very negligible. Meryl's strength just comes from the raw stats. He's got the cav health, he's got the cav attack. Those are the two stats you want over defense, and that just naturally gives him raw value purely because of that. And then I'd say his competition is Rob. We see him up here. Rob immediately has the benefit of being awakenable, and I think most people should probably get him to 2 stars just for tavern stats, which will give you the plus 10k army size, because he has leadership and combat rate in the tavern, and everyone should have him gold anyway, so he's very high value there. He has 150 cav health and cav defense, so his base stats are a little worse than Meryl's, because he has the defense instead of the attack. Obviously you're going to want the attack, especially on cav. And then his active, the rage cost is higher, it's 900, which is a lot. Deals skill damage 600%, so it's lower single target damage than Meryl's is. The thing with it is it's a cone, and it can hit 3 targets, so it can do a max of 1800% damage, which effectively doubles what Meryl can actually do. So his active is significantly better in my opinion, especially because it's an AoE dispel with 100% proc rate, and that is a big deal, because it's immunity as well as buff removal. So if you can hit that on 3 targets consistently, then I do think Rob is slightly better than Meryl, and if I was running a free-to-play march, I would probably do these 3. The issue is these three won't really buff your cav attack much at all. It will only be 150%, and all of them have actives that proc off attack damage. So there's maybe a balance to be found there, arguably, and Meryl could be better than either Jean or Rob, I'd say, in that third slot, just to add to the scaling of the active damage. I think that would just come down to personal preference, but generally this is how I would rank them. So my premium lineup would be this. I'd definitely have Enzo as the Knight Commander too, the main commander, whatever he's called, because he is probably the most guaranteed value on his active. And a free-to-play March, I would do that. But I would not begrudge you for doing probably that instead either. Either works. You'll probably get more elimination points doing this, just because of the higher attack stats. So go with what you want there, I'd say. Just whatever you do. Don't use this guy, he's awful. If you really want to hyper buff your attack scaling, you want to run like an attack comp, maybe, but I really don't think it's worth it. If you're going to do an attack comp for elimination points and you're free to play, run that. Drop Jean, don't try and fit in Mengo, because his active is just awful. It's far too low value for him to be worth it.